So I'm one of those people that just hates Tony Stark character-wise, like as a person.
I understand completely. He's an asshole.
very confusing. He's
an asshole. Please continue.
motivations.
That was a great. That moment made me realize just like there was a little bit thing to Peter though. He had such a charm that because he's almost worse in terms of just being around. Like the thought of having to work with him would be, God, I'd jump out into space.
Yeah, but Tony, I'd roll my eyes. Peter, I'd claw them out.
Yeah. No, but for me, what I thought was great is how economic the whole film is. Every moment tells the viewer something about either how characters are, how they relate to each other. That's something like I still want to rewatch it because I haven't seen it since the theater. But I feel like I'd get so much more from watching it again.
So I've been studying it. I've watched it about a dozen times now. I'm studying it, so it's not just for entertainment. So it works.
I have a feeling I'm doing that with the Spider-Man game again. I'm studying it at this point, going through it for the second time.
Which one? Sorry.
Spider-Man, Marvel Spider-Man, the recent one.
Yeah, no, Homecoming was. So I didn't see that until like a couple months later. But I managed to avoid spoilers, except for the Vulture reveal. And I wish I'd seen it in theaters for that reveal because holy
you mean the
shit.
One with the parent? You mean?
Yeah, the fact he was her dad. Was her dad. Holy shit! And then that scene in the car. Oh my god, that scene in the car was just chilling.
It was great.
So in theaters. I need to tell you the theater part for me, because I was there watching it, and some guy who was not really paying attention just saw it and vocally said, "Oh shit!" just like super loud, and like the whole theater laughed. It was that moment is so rich and actually kind of relatable in some ways. The drive to the dance with your date's.
It echoed Infinity War in a lot of ways. Like, for example, when Peter hitches a ride on the ship, and he's like, "Well, this is sort of your fault because this suit's crazy intuitive." And it reminded me of when he told Tony, like, "If you actually cared, you would be here." And then Tony stepped out of the fucking suit and just stared him down. Like they kept their relationship very consistent.
God.
I think I really liked Infinity War just because their villain wasn't so comically villainous. It's such a...
Thanos was really well done.
I think that's a really big problem that a lot of games have. Their characters are obviously evil, and it's freakishly annoying sometimes. It's too comical. So obvious.
Are there any game villains that really stick out to you?
Right now, I'm playing Destiny 2, and their villain is basically
none of those stuck out to me.
Kind of like Thanos, but he's kind of just like, I'm gonna harness the power of this star thing that I think these people used to travel with or something, and I'm gonna use it for its proper usage of destruction.
That guy fucking pisses me off.
It's so annoying. Yeah, I know.
His lieutenant the whole time is like, "Why don't you just take it? Why don't you just take it? Why don't you just take it?" And the whole time he's like, "No, it has to be given to me. It has to be given to me. That's why it matters." And his lieutenant's just like, "Dude, you could be ruling the universe right now if all you did was take the damn thing and stop playing chess with the guy."
See, and he's also this entire time he's sucking his dick the whole time. He's just like, "You're good enough. Just take it. Come on, you're great. You're fantastic." And it's almost as if like the main antagonist dude is like leading him on just so he can hear compliments from him.
Yeah.
Just so he can get his own dick sucked.
You know what my favorite part of the Lord of the Rings is? Have you guys read the books by any chance?
No.
Yeah.
I read half of The Hobbit and almost finished The Fellowship of the Ring.
Well, it's way fucking better than watching The Hobbits, so that's good. But no, so the ending of the third book, Return of the King, is drastically different from the film. So you all know how the film ends, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Mordor's taken down, like, okay, cool, all that's dealt with, he's crowned king, great. Well, except, unlike in the films, when the hobbits go back to Hobbiton, it's been fucking ransacked by Saruman, who's basically press-ganged every hobbit and turned the whole place into a nightmare. And they basically go back, and Saruman doesn't die until then. And I love it because it's a Pyrrhic victory. Like, they save Middle-earth, but their own home is destroyed. And I like that more just because it's more realistic. The fact is, even if you want the good guys to win even all the time in a fantasy realm, they're not going to win everything they want. Otherwise, there was no conflict actually happening.
There's a bittersweetness to it.
Yeah.
In the end.
I think
Exactly.
bittersweet endings are they just feel that much more real. And I think it's a lot more satisfying than a purely happy ending and a purely sad ending. Some people try too hard to do one or the other.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like,
I
for
like
example, I knew the snap was going to happen in
Yeah.
Infinity War, but it didn't make me any less go like that exhale
Yeah.
of just taking in the moment.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I know it was going to happen. Yeah, we know it's not going to stick, but it was still impactful because of the way the film was made.
Just I think the whole shock value I think that the cast had was kind of like the shock value that we had. You know, they built up as much emotional attachment with each other as we did for them, and then
Well,
see
they've
them
been
feel so they kind of just were very dazed. You know, they were just looking around. They didn't like emotionally weep on the floor and go no kind of thing. No, they didn't.
Yeah, what were you saying, Chris?
I was just talking about that moment post snap, when people were going away. Just the lack of sound. It's like the sound of air
It was
blowing.
really well done. It was
Everyone's
so
just
well done.
empty. You know,
Yeah,
kind of how I felt.
it's
Oh,
kind of for me. I think of moments in my life where I felt like I just fucked up, and there's this emptiness.
yeah. It's
And then you kind of just stand there.
Yeah, you're just like
Process.
realizing like, oh fuck.
Yeah, and you're processing.
There were
Yeah.
two moments toward the end of that film that really hit me hard. One is the award that Tom Holland gets for improvisation, because his Mr. Stark, I don't want to go, was just devastating to
Was
me.
that really improv? Oh shit.
Yes, yeah, that was improvised,
Oh man,
right? Isn't that crazy?
that is. Crap.
And then the fact that throughout the film, because Thanos' whole thing is that it should be an impartial culling, right? He talks about not it being from the poor or the rich, that it would be impartial, and that was the whole point. So I like that through the entire fucking film, the Black Order doesn't care about killing people, but Thanos does not kill indiscriminately, not even close. And I think that makes the final snap from him a lot more chilling and gave him a lot more depth as a character, because it took him even farther from the comically evil territory and more into the kind of motivationally conflicted territory.
See, the only thing that kind of went against that, well, it was supposed to support it, but it was when he killed Gamora.
Oh yeah.
It looked that was a little lackluster. I think that's the only part that, you know, it was supposed to support the fact that he's a conflicted killer, but it felt a little fake.
Well, that was there for a different reason, because I agree that it wasn't super impactful for me, but that was there to create a juxtaposition against when every single other stone he acquires, despite the heroes making the decision not to trade the life. So Loki doesn't trade Thor's life, right? He decides to trade Gamora's life. Strange decides to save Tony in return for losing the stone. They fight to save Vision for the entire film. That's why it's too late to destroy it at the very end. Every single stone we see him acquire, it was juxtaposing his decision to sacrifice a loved one versus our hero's decision to save one of theirs. So in the film, I thought it was lackluster. In the plot, I felt it was fulfilling.
Yeah,
Huh.
it made sense.
The delivery could have been done a little bit more clear. That being said,
Yeah.
Overall, I really enjoyed the film. I don't know what else to say
Yeah,
along that.
Good.
The other thing that stuck out to me in Infinity War was the way they did the fight on Titan, because it's clearly a precursor to the fight in Avengers 4. That's going to happen. You know, it will end with a fight. It's just a matter of how it goes down. So the fact we saw almost all of the Guardians and then some of the strongest Avengers on Titan fighting him, and all they were trying to do was get the gauntlet off of his hand, and they still failed. But how they did is so artfully done, because the fight starts out with all of them executing this carefully made plan with all of them involved to get this off his hand. They fuck up because of a totally predictable issue with Quill. And what does Thanos do immediately after that? He starts taking them seriously. He drops a goddamn moon on them. He drops a fucking moon on them, so Spider-Man's busy trying to save them from all the debris, and it really just comes down to Tony and Strange, the two strongest ones there, against Thanos. And Strange, tries to throw the mirror dimension at him, tries to do all these clones, and Thanos just wrecks him. Until finally it's a physical fight, so all the planning's done, all the strategy's gone. And it's just a physical fight of Tony and Tony's ingenuity and his tech against Thanos. And yes, all he does is get that drop of blood, but that's a drop of blood more than every single other person in the entire show. And it doesn't happen by a carefully thought out plan, like Thanos executes the entire film. It's done off of a gut feeling, not gut feeling, but an instinctual fight and battle, a straight 1v1 between Thanos and Tony.
Which is actually pretty damn impressive coming from Tony Stark. Shit.
Yeah, because he wasn't born a god. He didn't come upon magical powers. Everything Tony has, he came up with on his own. Sorry, I studied this film so much that I haven't had much chance to talk about the analysis.
Were you studying it for your writing?
Yeah, I study a lot of things for storytelling, and then I just take the lessons from that and take it for both game design and writing. Like, I did this stint where I took all of the mythology from as much of the world as I could find. So the original Norse poems with the translations, a lot of the Confucian myths, a lot of the Indian mythology, some Native American, etc. And then it dissected them to figure out, okay, what made this endure? What made this last for thousands, possibly tens of thousands of years, to the point where I can read it on my computer?
Oh.
That's interesting.
What
do you
did
look
you
at
conclude?
folklore at all?
Oh, that too.
Sorry, one at a time. I
Fine,
couldn't hear
go.
you over each.
Christian, go.
Oh, my thought was a folklore. Like, how have you looked into that? There's some really good resources for that. Actually, I have a friend. He does games, but he's mostly a comic writer, and he's trying to find older folklore from like Native American / Latin sources, because a lot of it is kind of destroyed.
Yeah.
And he's trying to create a comic that kind of really feeds off of that.
That's great. Like, for example, one of the areas I had the most trouble finding records for was almost all of Africa, because so much of it was based upon what's it called? When you only pass your stories through
verbally,
yeah,
oral storytelling.
yes, oral tradition. Because of that, the only part of Africa that actually has good records is Egypt, because they documented them differently. Almost nothing else was translated into English, and I bet you is even available online.
It seems to get to go to an original source, aka someone who just was told a story at some point and can retell it.
Yeah. So I'm sorry.
Even
What was your question?
for Brian?
What? I thought you both asked me something.
Oh no, my question was for Dom. Like, so what have you learned in terms of why do some of these stories, why do they stay longer than others? Why do they survive the test of time?
Okay, so I'm going to preface this by saying that nothing I'm about to say should be super surprising or something you've never heard before. So I'm not trying to say this stuff to be clever.
Right.
Everything I'm going to bring up is just finding out, is me figuring out that these things are worth focusing on more so than other things. Not that other things are not important. So I just want to make that caveat. So first off, simplicity. If you can dial down your storytelling into something that can be put into an elevator pitch, basically, that is going to make it much easier to digest, no matter how much you complicate it later on. You need to make sure that your storytelling style and the story you're telling itself both can be distilled to an understandable summary. If it can't, you need to fucking work on your story, dude.
Interesting.
Has to be digestible.
Yeah, because, well, even if you take something as complex as Infinity War, most people can point to one moment as the most impactful for them, and that's the snap. And making a film that complex, with that many beloved characters and this many important story beats that happen throughout it, that I would say have a lot of ups and downs, you still have one focal point that almost everyone can agree on. And that's where the simplicity comes in. That's where the kind of longevity really pans out, is making sure it can be distilled like that. The other factor was definitely making sure you nest your story into terms and things people value, right? So there's a reason superhero films and a lot of underdog stories start with the hero's parents fucking dying every time. It's because it's a tried and true way to get people invested and understand what this would be like for this character, why it would matter to them, why it is a big fucking deal. So if you're telling this story and you're saying, oh, the whole world's at stake, but you can't illustrate that in a way people can relate to, your stakes might as well be like this person's littering in terms of how much people care. So those are the two things that I found more or less consistent across everywhere in the world. Everything else had different spins or was different depending on where you were. Those two things seem to be consistent for all good storytelling.
What I think is interesting there is what you brought up about things you do in terms of what matters to people. Because that way you can kind of you can almost see the values of society based on either similar stories or just who happens to be the characters in your stories.
Yeah, so like stories with morals.
Well, I'd hesitate to call it stories with morals, just because it doesn't have to be about morals at all.
You want to hear an awful example of a story with morals falling flat on its face? Star Wars, The Last fucking Jedi.
Oh, don't get me started.
Every fucking moral. There's literally a moral in front at every fucking doorstep that they walk into.
Damn.
Everything that surrounds Rose and I already forgot his name. Finn. Rose and Finn has a fucking moral. Every location that they go to has a fucking moral. But it just reeks of Disney, and they try to shove it down your throat. They give us the big Disney dick and just try to make us accept that this is no longer its own franchise anymore. This is a Disney-owned franchise.
I am not going to start on the last.
Okay. I'm trying to think of the rights. There's a few. I've been listening to this one podcast called Lore. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it.
Wow, it's a really complex, long name.
No, yeah. But they do.
Cover? Yeah.
Sean, I don't want to get into that either. But they do a good job at reaching out to lore from across the world and they talk about not just lore, but also like some small stories, some scary stories, and they talk about how in some stories they always mention that the characters reflect the value of like that society. I'm trying to remember. There's this Icelandic story of these. They're basically like little gnomes or like elf people.
Oh
They're-
yeah.
Yeah, you know. But they're basically.
Their name is really hard to pronounce.
Yeah, I don't remember. But they're almost like a way of reconnecting with the nature side of the world, and they're basically a mechanic so that the native Icelanders would still, I guess it's basically take care of the world around them, and they, if you do not or if you disturb their locations which are sacred, certain things will go wrong or hurt the individuals that disrespect it. There's like
Here, check the general chat. I think that's them.
Yeah. Tiny little. Are you talking about the lady or the guy jumping around?
Yeah, no, it's the things jumping around.
Yeah, they're like little elves, like straight up.
Like fairies? I can't.
Kind of like fairies, actually.
Sort of.
Think of like a fairy hobbit Smurf thing.
Okay.
Very.
They're more the mischievous. They're the mischievous midget stereotype,
Yeah.
which is, funnily enough, seemingly popular everywhere.
Oh, it's everywhere. It's
all around the world.
Small thing that fucks with you and has a smirk is apparently universally hated.
I think it's because small people in general were ostracized back in the day, so they had to be the funny people. You know?
I don't know.
It's
that-
definitely. That's the impression that
Well, the reason I would push back on that is just because it's also present in cultures that didn't do that.
Wait, how
like
so?
Native
Can
American
you explain that?
cultures, which have no connection with European ones, still have this concept.
Yeah. So even though they do not ostracize people because of their height or size, they still have that stereotype. They still had those stories. Which is the thing I find fucking interesting.
Okay. Whoa.
Yeah, that's what made it such an interesting kind of project for me, was finding how many similarities were from radically different cultures. It also helped me identify why Greek mythology is so popular in the West.
Why's that?
Most mythologies, most folklore, doesn't have the gods present alongside humans. The more complex ones have them in a completely different realm. Some of the more grounded ones, like Norse, have a story detailing why they're all fucking dead. Because basically our world exists after Ragnarok happens, and almost all of them get fucking wiped out. The Greek myths are some of the only ones that have the gods moving among humans and basically doing shit right alongside of us.
That's
And it's
what
very
interests
relatable.
people.
It's relatable.
It
And that's so
certainly interests individualistic cultures.
And it also exemplifies like I think people are interested in people who progress, and when there's a force above you that's almost impossible to surpass, that makes for an interesting story.
That's almost the premise of Wuxia in China. Wait, BChan, have you still been recording all this?
Yes.
Holy shit.
You better cut like the first hour or so. Basically, when Justin got in, I think once we stopped caring what we were doing, it got.
Well, Justin got in after almost at the
it's
2 hour
like
mark.
That's like 2 hours.
That's 4 fucking hours, Chris.
Wait, do you really feel like I should cut out most of it? I mean, this is all.
No, it doesn't matter.
No.
No one's actually gonna listen to this.
I would just keep it for an archive. Like
Yes,
this,
archive.
Yeah.
for my personal. This is
So I can go back and see how annoying I sound.
Yeah, exactly,
Oh, that's
and
great.
listen to myself talk about flat penises. That's honestly the quality content that I subscribe for. What was I
So-
gonna do?
Here, can I get you guys' opinion on something?
Yeah.
Go on.
So there's 2 stories I'm going to start writing alongside my current one, and they're all within the same universe, the same world. One is the premise of there's a guy who everyone thinks knows what happens after you die, and finally he basically fakes his death and comes to Los Angeles to help a small community of basically supernatural creatures that are in a ghetto.
So that's like Fables, but in the West Coast.
Pretty much.
But there's also this guy who can kind of see. He knows what happens when you die.
Yes, and he won't tell anyone.
I like Fables, so I like this. Also, West Coast. I think there's a lot of interesting caricatures you can play with that. Especially, I don't know. There's a lot of stereotypes, not like bad.
Oh,
ones.
yeah.
I'm talking about like criticisms of the West Coast that you can play with.
Definitely.
And I'm really curious how that interacts with the individual who knows what happens when you die.
Yeah, it's basically there's going to be a lot of people in that ghetto that would not normally be there.
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm just a little confused. What was the question?
I was just getting your guys' opinion on the premise.
Oh, okay.
So that's the premise of one, and then the other one is I love the trope of overpowered characters because they're fun. Yeah, so this one would be basically one of the most powerful human mages on the planet, being hunted by a cult trying to create an apocalypse.
I like that. Very like
Is
it.
he wait? Is he creating the apocalypse or the cult is?
No, that's definitely the cult,
Oh, okay.
and
but-
they're trying to hunt him down because he has something they need to do it.
How funny is the cult? Or not funny. I guess I just want to know more cult. And like, is this like a Eden's Gate cult? Is this kind of like a?
This is a there are these things that are sealed all around the world, which is what the main story I've been working on that I have about 20k words in right now.
Oh wow.
That basically they defy all of the laws of the universe. So the gods basically obey those or dictate them. And these creatures basically by breathing or by their body heat fuck them up. So they've all been sealed in different places around the world because they can't be killed, they can only be contained. And this cult is basically saying it's different factions with different mentalities. Some are like, well, it's going to happen eventually, so we might as well get good conditions for humans. And others of them are like, basically worship these things as deities. And this is one of the only factions where almost every fucking thing on the planet is against them. Because pretty much everyone can agree that these things getting out would be bad, even the most power hungry of them. So this mage that they're chasing is one of the most powerful people in the fucking world. He's more powerful than a lot of gods, and has one of the seals on his person. It's a physical thing. And so it's him running around the entire world in different locations, just constantly giving them the slip, or occasionally, if he's forced to, fighting them.
There's a lot of fun stuff you could do with that too. I like the idea of Oh, go on.
I get the feeling you're kind of making it a bit more of a comedy, right?
It's definitely the most humorous of the three. Because he's so powerful that he gets to fuck with people. And with a couple of the leaders of the cult, he almost has like a playful banter going. Because like the head of the it's gonna happen eventually, so we might as well get better conditions faction is is basically them being pragmatic, right? It's not that they're inherently evil, it's just that they think, well, this will happen eventually during creation, so might as well get it over with and get decent conditions or whatever. So he basically like trades like insults and compliments with her every time he barely escapes from them. Whereas another one, he basically treats like his child because it's another powerful mage, but he's not even close to him. So he's like, when are you going to be able to teleport like this, Chris? It's been 5 years already. Come on.
I'm like,
That's
you know,
Do you need some pointers? Here, let me give you some pointers.
Jen
And
is
like-
One Punch Man.
This makes you think a bit of a weird mix between Rick and Morty and One Punch Man.
Yeah.
It's sort of like
I'm liking this a lot.
Tatsumaki mixed with Tony Stark. Like Tony Stark's wit and arrogance mixed with Tatsumaki's overpowering presence and arrogance of just being.
Would this
Oh,
be weird if I
entitlement.
respected-
That's what
I
Tatsumaki
really
is.
like
Entitlement.
it, yeah.